everybody. I'm Betsy Billhorn, and welcome back to another episode of Under the Forelock, where we're talking to interesting people doing interesting things with horses. Today, I have Megan Rau, who's joining us. She has over 20 years of riding and training experience, has been trained both in natural horsemanship and also classical equitation, and has become a accredited and certified instructor with a foundation for Equestrian Arts. Megan is in Colorado, and she does a variety of stuff. So she's done jumping, she's done eventing, she's done dressage, she's done ranch sorting, she helps her neighbors collect their cattle, she does a fall branding with the cattle as well, and a variety of other sports with horses. Her main focus and training is to really have horses curious and excited about being ridden and going out and being with their humans and having a harmonized relationship together. So welcome, Megan, to the show, and thank you for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Yeah. So talk about a little bit. I mean, you and I have we know each other from days past, and I think people would like to know, you didn't come into horses where, I grew up and my dad was a rancher, a horse trainer, and then I followed in his footsteps. Or you didn't, wake up at 16 and go, I want to be a horse trainer, and that was it, right? You kind of came into this from another career, correct?
Yeah. It was always kind of my goal deep down inside. But I was always told, it's not possible, it's unrealistic. And so then I thought I wanted to be a vet for a while, and then I realized I was squeamish. So I was like, okay, well, I'll go into this other career path. And it worked out for me. I ended up following my dreams, and I guess it wasn't unrealistic.
Yeah. So when people say that it was unrealistic, because I think you hear a lot of that these days, right? It's like, you can't make a living. It's a labor of love, and you see a lot of people come into different equine professions and then they get out of them. So like, was it more economic that people were saying it's not realistic, or was it for other reasons?
Mostly economic. I also kind of felt like there was a lot of flaws in my education before. Mm-hmm. And so when I was like in my early teens and mid-teens, people would always be like, oh, you're really good with horses. You should work with my horse and you should give me lessons. And I was like, okay. I didn't really know what I was doing. But some reason the horses worked better with me, which is crazy because I look back now and I think I was terrible. But I always felt like there was something that was missing in my education. And part of it was economic, and part of it was I didn't want to build a career on feeling like I was faking it.
Right.
And so then when I met my teacher, Craig, he asked me on my second lesson if this is what I wanted to do for a living. And my face lit up and I said, yes, but I didn't think it was possible. And then 8 years later, here I am. I have my own farm and people working for me and working students, but it hasn't been an easy path. It's been a lot of hard work, and it's been good to get a real understanding of teaching the horse and the rider and being able to have a really good education to fall back on. Without that, I wouldn't be doing this career at all.
Yeah. And so you met Craig. Now, did you meet Craig at a clinic? You mentioned your second lesson, or did you, wake up one morning and say, okay, that's it. I'm going to go get a formal education and be a working student or whatnot. And, found Craig and then went to his place. So how did that happen?
So Craig comes to Colorado usually a couple times per year, and he comes to Castle Rock, and he was doing a clinic down there. And my dad and I were like, well, we're all in. And so we rode in that first clinic, and I rode my pony Fancy, and I was kind of scared of him. And I also didn't understand a lot of what he was saying to me, but I also had liked a lot of what he had to say. And so I was like, okay, well, it sounds like this guy has all the missing pieces that I've been struggling with for years. And he just totally flipped the way that I ride. And I'll never forget, after that clinic, I was riding my pony Fancy in the neighborhood, and I was like, turn right. What do I do? Because I've been riding a different way for 15 years. So.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned that you had holes that you were trying to fill. right? And then you went to this, to get this classical education with Craig. So how much, I'm going to use, the word cognitive dissonance, right? But you've been doing this for 15 years, and then you're going and you're learning, classical equitation. And so was it complete reversal and like unlearning, or have you been able to put those things back together? Or you found that there was kind of a progression or an explanation for things that maybe you've done intuitively? Like how did that sort itself out as you were studying with him?
Well, I would say at the beginning, it felt like a total flip for sure, because it was totally the opposite of what I've been doing for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I'm further along and I have a better understanding, it's interesting because you see so many common phrases and techniques in the horse world that are misunderstood and butchered. And so it's like, now that I'm further along, I see how they connect and where most modern riders get that idea wrong. But now I feel like, I have it back. It's not, I don't know if I explained that.
I think like, because I've had similar experiences where I think you get to a point in your education, studying, and you begin to see, oh, okay, well, here's how this evolved to that. Like I saw this really cool thing where I was reading this article and watching a lot of video about this guy who he rides endurance races, and he has Arabs, and he was in the Middle East and riding with some of these folks out there, and there's a very traditional way that they do the bridle, and it's bitless, and it has like one rein, right? And this has been the way it's been forever and ever and ever and ever. And so he was experimenting, and he rides endurance that way. The people that he was studying with and was there with, they actually made him one of these bridles as a gift when he left, right? And he's since learned how to make them himself. But the interesting thing about that is when you look at the construction of the bridle, you can see where that started to kind of drift into the evolution of the, and I'm going to totally butcher this and I apologize, but in Western, especially in the vaquero, right? You start the horse in the braided.
Yeah.
The
I can't think of what it's called either.
Yeah, but with a button on the bottom.
Yeah.
That's horrible. Oh my God. I'm doing a show about horses and I don't even know what that thing is called. So, but you can see the progression, right, of the construction, and the theory of it is the same. It has that one, the one rein, and, and how that kind of moved along, right, with a noseband. And, you just begin to see that some of the concepts are the same, or they evolved in certain ways, right, for a variety of reasons. And, I think you had on your website too a very nice explanation about the differences, right, where Western riding came from, right? And you can also, if you look at, I was in Portugal for the Golega Horse Fair, and when you watch the people doing the working equitation competitions, right, and it comes out of the ranching, but you can see the kind of the evolution between that and then what the Western riding is out here in the United States. You can almost like where they all kind of come together, right? So if that makes sense. Yeah,
it does. And like the two examples that stand out in my mind the most from when I was growing up that I heard a lot, and I'm like, oh, now I understand that, but I also see how they butchered it. And the first one is like, good writing is just basic, focus on the basics. Mm-hmm. It's like, it is, but I didn't know what the basics truly were. And I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what the basics truly were. I would say the basics are being able to control the weight on all four of the horse's feet and control how fast and slow they are. Before my education, I had no understanding of what that was or how to do that.
But was that your basics though? I mean, was that even what you were calling the basics at that time, or?
No, see, the basics to me at that time were like walk, trot, canter.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Right. Yeah.
Turn left, turn right. Yeah. And then the other one that really stands out in my mind is I got told to seesaw the horse a lot, you know, to try and get them to come down. And
Yeah.
now that I know that there's a rhythm to the riding, and so it's like boom, 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 take and give, take and give. But I didn't learn it that way. I learned pull this rein, pull this rein, pull this rein, pull this. And so I could see how the cradling and that kind of feeling,
Yeah.
the correct education got butchered into that. And there's a lot of examples of that. That's just two of them. So.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, and I think too, and I'm sure you've encountered this, is that there's also a need to speed up things, right? So people, you know, they want the affect or the training to be faster. And so, you know, you could kind of see if I'm seesawing, you know, that I'm creating the affect to get them to be lower versus, you know, doing kind of more of the cradling or the jingling, you know, of the fingers to let them figure it out and get down there, right? You know what I mean, over time. So yeah, so it's kind of interesting too, because I wonder if you also, now that you've come back to really understanding, you know, what the basics are, what their foundation is, and you can see how or why things, you know, got butchered, right, or radically altered, you know, to be different. So. Because it is really more like a matter of precision, correct? Right? When you're when you're trying to get when you're trying to get other things. So going back to when you were studying with Craig, then I mean, now you did a working student, right? So you went and lived there and worked on the farm, right? And as an apprentice versus, you know, taking lessons, right? So that was more of a traditional kind of a working student position.
Yeah. So I trained with both Craig and Marianne. Craig was my first introduction, and then obviously later I worked with Marianne, which was nice because I got a good balance of them both. And being a working student didn't just make me a better rider and a better teacher, but it taught me how to manage a barn, because when stuff falls apart and you got lame horses and your help doesn't show up, you still gotta get horses done, and you still gotta teach lessons. You gotta figure out how to make it work and be creative. So that was a huge thing that it taught me, and to just try and keep a positive attitude. And so yeah.
And what was that time commitment? I mean, is that like
I worked about probably close to 60 hours a week, because I did 6 days a week, and then I would come and I would usually ride before I had to start getting horses ready. I would feed and then I would ride really quick, and then I would stay late and ride my Andalusian Grayson. And oh my gosh, there were so many nights when I didn't want to do it. The last thing I wanted to do was get another horse. I work with another horse, because that was at the beginning. I didn't get to do a lot of the riding. I was just doing all the grunt work, you know.
Like a true apprenticeship, right?
Exactly. Gotta test them. But every time after I got off Grayson, I was happy that I did it. So it ended up making my days a lot longer than usual, but it was totally worth it.
And you know, so if people because I know, like, a lot of, you know, trainers, they have a working student program, and I think you touched on a really good point there, right? That it's work, right? You know, you're not showing up there and, you know, lying around and, you know, riding your dream horse, and, you know, it's, you know, and I mean, the value of the grunt work, I mean, like you said, though, you can handle it, right? So now you have your own place, and if things go sideways and somebody doesn't show up, then it's not a massive drama, right? Because you can pretty much do all of it. So
and it's important, I think, to kind of test people a little bit, you know, see how hard they're going to work, if they really want to put the effort and the work in. Like, who's the student who's staying late to ride their horses, who's taking 10 minutes to go to Mediterranean work with a horse or something like that, you know, who really wants to learn versus who's just there to kind of pass the time and pick the stalls. And
so how you know, it sounds like you had to be somewhat proactive, right? You know, so how does that work as a working student? You know, do you say, hey, I want a lesson this week, or, you know, like how do you end up getting trained by a master trainer?
I'm smiling because Mary politely said Craig gets mad because no working students ever ask him for lessons. So I was never afraid to ask him for lessons. I was asking for lessons all the time. To the point that I think I annoyed him a little bit.
The opposite way.
He might have regretted that comment.
So it was like every day, can we have a lesson? Can we have a lesson? Yeah, but I mean, I think that's I think that's valuable, right? Because you get what you give, right? So if you show up there, like, yeah, I think you even use the word passive, right? If you're waiting, then nothing's going to happen, right? So, you know, and I guess too, isn't that kind of, if you're passive and trying to run a business, you're not going to make it either, right?
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's a good experience to have. So can you talk about like the progression a little bit? So you went there and then we had to like kind of relearn everything, right? You know, toss everything out the window and start with the basics again. And then how have you reintegrated that back into, you know, because I know, you know, Craig isn't out there doing ranch sorting and, you know, rounding up cattle. So how does that work, you know, when you had that kind of reintegration process?
Well, so for the timeline, I did clinics for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So I did kind of get a foundation and then I went out there.
Yeah.
But as for reintegrating it, I mean, the cool thing is I can control the weight on all four of my horse's feet, and control how fast and slow they go.
Yeah.
What could you not integrate that into?
No, right. It's for
Into
anybody.
anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of important. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And so, I mean, that's why I think it's funny when people say like, oh, I do this kind of riding, or it's like, it's all training the horse. Or when somebody asks me like, oh, are you training this horse? I've been getting that question a lot lately, or are you doing a training session? And I kind of look at them like, is that a serious question? Like every time you're interacting with your horse, you're training them.
Yeah, yeah.
You're training them.
Yeah.
And so it's all just about being present with the horse, whether you're following a cow or doing a canter pirouette, it's all being in a relationship with the horse. And your relationship is going to vary from horse to horse, just like it does from person to person. And I think too many people don't consider it. I mean, they do, but not in as much of a thoughtful way that it's a relationship you're having with the horse. Every time you're with the horse, it's your relationship with the horse. And your relationship with the horse is going to be different than somebody else's relationship with the horse. Just like none of the relationships in your life are the same, whether it's you with everybody else or everybody else with you. It's always going to be different, but it's all should be happy and healthy, hopefully. And that's what it's about, being with the horse. It's not like, oh, now I'm going to dinner with Megan, and now I'm going to do dinner Megan, and now I'm going to do movie Megan, and now it's riding in the car Megan. It's all about being in a relationship.
Right. Yeah. No, that's so true. And so, you know, like you mentioned, you know, people kind of get stuck on training and not training, like it's a binary thing, but also I think disciplines, right? So when you're talking, you know, or you have people come to your barn and take lessons with you, like how does that work, right? So they're going to come and be like, well, I want to do this, right? And you're like, well, let's do that. Or I mean, how do the clients find you, and because they're looking for something a little bit different? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, usually I have people find me because they're kind of looking for something a little bit different. It's tricky when you get new clients, especially when they come from what they think is a pretty good education, and you realize that there's a lot of holes, like managing, encouraging them while also politely showing them where their holes are can always be kind of a tricky road to navigate.
So how do you do that? Like, because I mean, obviously you have a successful business, so how, you must know something on how to navigate those tricky situations.
I'm trying to work on my people skills. I think definitely the best thing that I try to do is tell people about where I came from and like how I did it wrong for 15 years and how I understand what it's like to go through to realize that you were wrongly educated for 15 years and now you have to relearn, and that I sucked as bad as everybody else, if not worse than everybody else. Like I started off just as bad as everybody else. So trying to express that to people, I think, is definitely helpful, and telling everybody that they're going to have the lesson where they can't get fancy to go forward is important too. And so just telling them that, everybody goes through this, and confusion is part of the learning process, and that you just have to keep trying. There's
Yeah.
nothing like working with horses to teach you persistence.
Yeah, and patience.
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
lot, a
exactly.
lot, a lot, a lot of patience.
And
Yeah.
one of my favorite gifts from the horses is you have to be able to laugh at yourself.
Yes, often, almost all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's a good thing for perfectionists like me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also just it's knowing when, when to ride and when not to ride, right? When not to push it, when to push it, right? So that you're kind of, not creating a situation for yourself, right? Because I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure you've had this, where you or a student show up and, your day's been really bad, and, now, the horse, fancy won't go forward, God damn it, right? Yeah. And it has nothing to do with fancy. It has everything to do with, your day and where you are at that time, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I actually had one of those days a couple days ago because I'm planning my wedding right now and everything fell apart. And
oh no.
I still had to go out and teach lessons and train horses and pretend like everything was hunky-dory.
And put a big smile on your face.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the thing that I find that I try to do when I come to the barn in that sort of attitude in that way is to set a really small goal. Like today, some of your listeners probably aren't going to know what this is, but today I'm going to catch my horse and I'm going to do meta-training work. And that's it. And then it's like, okay, if that goes well, maybe I'll do some work in hand. Okay, if that goes well, then I'll ride if I feel up to it. But I set a very small goal, and I do this when I don't want to work and when I'm stressed and when I'm worried about a dangerous horse or how the horse is going to interact. I set my goals very low, and I'm like, okay, if I get to part 1 and I still feel comfortable, then I can go to part 2. And then if I still feel comfortable, I can go to part 3. Okay, no, I don't quite feel comfortable there. I'll stop at part 2. So I think it's important to really set your expectations low, especially for somebody who's as goal-oriented as me, because horses do not like goal-oriented.
No, and they're totally on their own time too, right? Because I like how you broke that up. It's part 1, part 2. It's not 5 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. We're gonna have this in an hour, right? So those training sessions, I'm assuming, can be anywhere from 5 to 50 minutes or an hour or anything in between, because it's that stopping part on whatever part that you're on, right? That's when we're saying we're good.
And you'll be surprised. Sometimes those are the best days you have because you do stuff that you wouldn't normally do, and you find and figure out things you wouldn't normally see.
Going slower, right? And breaking it down into really tiny parts. Yeah. Now you mentioned the Mediterranean work. So a lot of listeners don't know what that is. So why don't you explain a little bit what that work is and how that's kind of unique.
So Craig and Marianne taught me how to do Mediterranean work. As far as I've been told, Craig and Marianne are also the first trainers to ever write anything down about it. So the reason we call it Mediterranean work is because it was started around the Mediterranean Sea, probably sometime in antiquity. And what it is I call it sometimes meditation with the horse. It's all about just finding a harmony and harmonizing with the horse. And the benefits I think that are most important of it is it recreates lightness in the horse, and it educates the rider or the handler, because you're on the ground when you do it. Well, you can do it under saddle too. It educates the person on what does it feel like when the horse barely shifts their weight off the right front? What does it feel like when they're moving across the left diagonal? What does it feel like when they're about to take a step forward? And being able to have that really good sense of the horse is so important. Like I can always tell when my horse is going to move off the left front versus the right front. And I never would have had that education without the Mediterranean work. And so the Mediterranean work is based off of twos. So everything in life is based off of twos, like to and from. That's what all your A's are based off of, because the horse is a space animal. It's very simple. It's either to the horse or it's from the horse. Other things that are twos, male and female energies, which is what you're basically playing with in the Mediterranean work. Electricity works through positive and negative. Even computers work through ones and zeros. So one muscle contracts, the other muscle relaxes. All of this is the same idea in Mediterranean work. It's hard. Sounds super woo-woo-y.
I was gonna say.
Feel it, it makes sense. So it's like about balancing those energies, like the contraction and the relaxation. So what you do is you put your hands on the horse and you see if you can find a flow with the horse. And when you do it with a horse who's never done it, you put your hand on the horse, they feel like a rock, you believe it's never going to work.
Yeah.
And so you just have to kind of have this attitude of like, oh, I can do it tomorrow if it doesn't work. But once you start to find a flow with the horse, and you'd be surprised how sensitive they are and how much they'll rock with you, then you see if you can direct the flow. And that's what you want to do in the riding too, is my horses are trained to follow the harmony. Doesn't matter what aids I do for the walk to part, trot to part, canter to part, whatever I'm asking the horse to do. They're trained to harmonize with my body. But I'm the one who wants to ride them, so I have to learn to harmonize with them first. And all of that starts with the Mediterranean work.
And that's from the ground, right? So, and it's something, like you said, you could even do 5-10 minutes of, so it's not, this whole big thing, like another thing I have to add, right? Another hour to my ride, right? So you could do it anytime, pretty much.
Yeah, and especially when I'm like feeling stressed out or like, oh no, I got to rush through this horse. I try and always take 2 minutes to just do some Mediterranean work, because it just helps me slow down. Be like, I'll do what I can do today and just be present with the horse. Because whenever I'm in a rush, if I rush through it, I always have a terrible ride. If I just take even 30 seconds and just even pet my horse and try and see if I can find that flow, I always have a better ride.
Nice. Now, is Mediterranean work something you teach your students as, when they come and they train with you, or is that kind of a separate thing? Like, how does that inform, your clientele?
Yeah, I try and teach it. I haven't done a formal clinic on it. I do usually what we call a crash course, where I'll do it in a lesson, but I'm trying to plan a clinic this winter after all the wedding craziness is over with, because I've been teaching it kind of in a shorter sort of format, because I realize how important it is to everything you do with the horse. If you don't have that sense of to and from and flow equality, just like the seesawing, like that is too much. And what you're basically doing that's correct is cradling the horse in a Mediterranean sort of fashion on the reins, to and from and back and forth, just real soft. And if you don't have a sense of the Mediterranean work, I think it's very hard to find that rhythm with the horses.
Yeah. Because you see it a lot where, how do you say this? You kind of have your own rhythm in your head, and you're very focused on doing this, and you have like no clue what's going on underneath you, right? Because and I think you brought up an important point where you were saying that in order for the horse to harmonize with you, you have to harmonize with them first, right? So you kind of have to figure out where they're at and get that flow, and then you can adjust the flow. I mean, that sounds like really basic, what the basics are, right? For doing the Mediterranean. So if you were to talk to somebody, just assuming all the listeners don't know, I mean, I know what it is and I do it, but what are some like basic things, like when you say you have a crash course, like if somebody were watching this right now, like what would you suggest they do if they said, oh, I'm really curious about this, or I want to try something like that at the beginning of my ride? Like, what would you?
I would say the most important thing is to pet the horse softly between their eyes and slowly. And when you think you're going slow, go slower. And then when you think you're going slower, go even slower. Everybody moves around the horses way, way too fast. And even when I tell people to slow down, they still are going way too fast. And so the thing I would tell the listeners to do is to pet the horse every time you go to catch him, and every time before you ride him, and every time when you get off of him, is the 3 points that I always try to do it. And it's not like, oh, pet the horse. It should be nice and tender, and like imagine like how you'd want somebody to stroke your cheek. just real nice and soft and slow. And one way to help people slow down and become present towards it is to just feel like each little hair follicle come across your fingers. And then you pet until you see the horse's eyes actually soften. Not just like, oh, I pet the horse, now my job's done, I did it. It's like, wait until the horse is like, oh, this feels good, and soften their eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Because otherwise you're just, you know, you're doing another thing at them, right? I'm petting you now.
Yeah, exactly.
So put your head down and be calm. We're good. Yeah. 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 Now, the other thing that you mentioned on your site was that you end up working with a lot of horses that come to you that have, you know, prior training issues or physical injuries. So is that something that by design, that's something you enjoyed specializing in? Or is it something that you just, you know, you have a knack and everybody, oh, you got to go to Megan. She's the, you know, she's the Wonder Woman with these kinds of horses. Like how are you kind of specializing in that?
Well, because I don't have a lot of money to spend on my own horses, so I got better. Yeah, none of my horses are very expensive, and so they are all kind of problem children physically, and one of them emotionally as well. And so I just kind of had to work with the horses I had and figure it out. And that's one of the things I love about the way that I'm trained is it helps the horse and it makes them healthier and happier riding partners. So it wasn't really by design. It was just what people have been bringing to me. But it's been kind of weird lately because I've been getting some really nice horses and training really expensive horses. I think all horses are nice. And it's just kind of a weird flip for me. I still have a lot of horses that have problems with physical issues and stuff like that. And I enjoy both of them. I do like the puzzles of the problem horses though. And I do like that I see that I make them healthier in the pasture, and like I can see their movement changing in the pasture and the paddock, and they're more comfortable just in their day-to-day lives. I look out in the paddock sometimes and all my horses are standing square, and it makes my heart so happy.
Oh. Yeah, that is really cool. And so what have you found any difference between, we talk about expense, right? Is there a difference in training the expensive horse versus the cheap horse, right? I mean, obviously the cheaper horse is going to probably has a history of training or, you know, like you said, emotional issues or some kind of physical injury. Is more expensive horse. Is it really, you know, you get what you pay for, or is there something else going on there generally?
Well, I mean, any horse that's been on this earth for a while is going to have physical issues, especially if they've been through training and poor training. And I would say most of the horse world, sadly, is poor training. And so you're going to always have issues no matter how expensive they are, unless they're young and not very expensive. But then you're also dealing with a young horse. So it's just different puzzles. I mean, in some ways I work with them and I'm like, wow, this is so stupid easy. My inexpensive horses, but then it's like, well, then they have other issues like, oh, they've been pulled on a lot or ridden inside reins a lot, so they've got neck issues, or this one's just a giant baby, and so you got to keep her brain with you. And so it's all not one better than the other. It's all just puzzles. And like I said, it's all just about being in a relationship with the horse. It's not like I value one horse more than the other horse.
Right. And what would you say, you know, because I, you know, there's so much that if you're in any kind of Facebook group related to horses, or, you know, you read Chronicle the Horse or any of these forums, and there's always, I think that, in fact, I think it was a Tamarack Hill Farm posted kind of recently about, you know, is it possible to get in an expensive, right? I think we're talking about $3,000 to $5,000 range, which could be very expensive for some people, but in an expensive eventing horse, right? And then go up the levels. And, you know, there's a very, very interesting debate that was going on there, you know, and, you know, it's a very polarizing thing, because I think there's a lot of people like, no, you got to top dollar, and, you know, that the cheaper horses are, you know, not good for a number of reasons. That's why they're cheap. And other people are like, well, you can find a lot of gems in the rough, but right? You've got to be an incredible trainer to do that. So I'm just curious what your point of view on that particular, because this seems to be a perennial debate. So
I think the problem is the beginning of the question.
yeah.
How do you get a horse that goes to the top level? It's like,
Right.
well, if that's your goal, you probably shouldn't be working with me because, yeah, I might get you there, but I don't want to work with people who that is their ultimate and only goal because I want their goal to be them being with the horse. And if that happens, great. And yeah, you can get really inexpensive horses and train them to the top level. Like my Andalusian Grayson, I spent $4,500 on him, and now he does all the upper level work. I mean, pirouettes, passage, flying, changes, everything.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to get him there, and he still has physical issues. I call him the bowl of Rice Krispies because he snap, crackles, and pops in the time.
Yeah.
But like it was I got this horse and I loved him, and so I wanted to work with him and make him as happy and healthy as possible. And by chance we got to this level. Great. And that it is great and it is really fun, but that's not what was important to me. What was important to me was my relationship with him and making him happy and healthy and a good riding partner, even if it was just doing walk work for the rest of his.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, that's a whole nother, I think, can of worms I inadvertently opened too, right? Which is kind of this goal orientation and going to the top levels versus, so many people just want to be with their horse, right? They just want to have, the barn is supposed to be a relaxing place for me, right? Being with my horse should be fun and, calming and, I get joy from that, not stress, or fear, right? And it seems that, I think a lot of people struggle with that, right?
I think a larger percentage of the horse world than most people think are actually on the I just want to enjoy being with my horse side. And I always thought that I would need to get back into competing and stuff like that to grow my business. And I found that I haven't because there's a lot of people out there who do just want to come to the barn and enjoy being at the barn and be present with the horse. And I think the barn atmosphere is also very important. I grew up at a lot of big show barns and everybody cutting each other down and talking behind each other's backs. And now that I have my own barn, I don't want that. That is my absolute last thing that I want. Everybody needs to be supportive and happy and healthy. And I think that the National School of Academic Equitation, Craig and Marianne's barn, really helped me set that standard because I was so nervous to ride like the owner's horses in front of them the first time. Like, oh geez, like I probably can't ride them that well. And they're going to be talking behind my back and saying what a terrible rider I am. But I mean, everybody was always super supportive and nice and helping each other. And there was always a ton of laughter. And that's the barn that I hope people feel like I'm creating. And I've gotten a few compliments that way because I almost quit riding when I was younger because of the barn drama.
Yeah.
And I ever want that to happen. And so I want people, and I think a lot of people just want to come to the barn and enjoy being with the horse. And those are the kind of clients that I want to have. And it's not that showing and having goals is wrong. Like if you want to go show, then go show. But just enjoy being with your horse because that's more important.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times people, goals and showing tend to be almost the same word, right? Where a goal could be, hey, I would love to just go walk on a trail for 20 minutes and not have my horse flip out, right? Or I would like to trot and not fall off, right? Or not be scared, right? Or I'd like to canter and not panic or, whatever it is, right? So I think if you take the show part out of the goal word, I mean, there's lots of worthy, nice, fun, harmonious, joyful goals to have, right, with your horse, right? Because I think, I'll just put this out there, but, you mentioned that Grayson, you and Grayson are doing very high level work. So when we talk about a progression, right, was this something that just as you and Grayson were working together, it was just kind of adding a little more spiciness, right? I wouldn't say it was a goal of yours, like, oh, I'm going to do the canter pirouette, but it was, kind of maybe stimulating him intellectually or, you know what I'm saying? Like, do you kind of feel like you've got to keep these guys like interested in what's going on and then, introducing some of these, different movements or?
Yeah, that's part of it. And I listen to him and hear what he has to suggest. And as I said, he has physical issues. So some
Mm-hmm.
days he's up for doing that stuff and some days he's not, which is part of the reason that I'm like, I could show him, yeah, and I could probably do pretty well. But on days when he's not feeling well, I don't want to push him. That's going to hurt our relationship.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like, it's just a natural, it was a natural progression. I mean, I got him 8 years ago and he stood up on his hind legs all the time when I first got him. Well, the first couple years, I was just working on not dying.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's kind of crazy how fast it's flipped, but it just was a natural progression. And I think about it as a conversation with him. Today, can
Mm-hmm.
you do this? No, I'm too sticky in my right hand. Okay, well then we'll talk about something else. And then sometimes he'll suggest it to me. Like that's how I got my first canter pirouettes. I was doing a pirouette at the walk, and I was like, oh, he feels like pretty lifted in his front end. I wonder if I step down a little bit on my stirrup, if he'll canter. And he did.
Oh, wow. Wow. That is really cool. And then you did canter pirouette and oh,
Yep.
that's so neat. Yeah. So I like how you talk about it's being a conversation, right? So because they can kind of go anywhere, and you can go to a really, really cool place with that conversation versus, saying, okay, well, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to go here now and we're going to end like that. Right. So, yeah. Now,
Yeah,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think being able to listen to the horse is
Yeah.
so important. Like most of the times I get the cool stuff the first time, the horse is kind of feeling that way and either they'll suggest it or I'll suggest it and it's kind of like an accident.
Yeah. And what happens, right, when you are, like when you get a new horse in training, a new horse that comes to you, right, and they've never been exposed to meta training work, or maybe they've never been exposed to the type of riding that you do, right, and they've been trained a different way or had a different exposure. Like how does that work, those first initial rides? Or do you notice that they go, whoa, what's going on here? Or do you have to kind of coax them out of it? Or what is there any kind of common theme in that?
Well, I always start them in hand because I usually
Yeah.
can see a lot of issues in hand when people bring horses to me before I even get on their back.
Hmm.
So I try to figure that out. But the most important thing I'd say is getting the horse curious and starting to want to engage with you because they're so used to being, this is what you do. You do exactly what I tell you, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And I
Hmm.
would say that works for a good chunk of the horses out there, but it also makes them, you find, either really spooky or
Hmm.
really dull or really fiery. It's like they aren't very balanced mentally, but they'll tolerate it. And
Hmm.
so being able to fix things on the ground, have the horse become curious again is the most important thing. And it's an important thing in your students as well. If your students are shut down and not curious and engaged, they're not going to learn either. But especially when you're working with the horse, being okay with letting them guess wrong at the beginning is so important because so many horses are insecure about guessing wrong and not getting it right and that they have to do exactly as they're told. And so trying to flip the horse's mindset to be like, oh, I can guess wrong and I am getting listened to here.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, it is kind of funny. Some of the horses are like, whoa, what happened to you? I'll never forget after I did my first internship with Craig and Marianne, I came back and I didn't take my horses. I was gone 5 weeks and I was brushing my pony fancy. And she turned and looked at me in the cross ties like, are you
What are you
okay?
doing?
What happened? I'll
That
never
is so
forget that look
funny.
she gave me that day.
That is so funny. Yeah, and I'm going to go back to a comment you made about even your writers, right? Being shut down. So, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what's the dynamic there when you get a student that comes in and they're shut down? Like, what do you think that's coming from?
Well, it comes from a variety. Everybody has different sort of traumas in their life, whether they're extreme or mild, and trying to make sure that you're not bringing any of that up in a way that the student can shut down. And I think, especially in the horse world, a lot of trainers and teachers don't listen to the student and the horse and where they're at that day.
Mm-hmm.
And the student will come in and think, oh gosh, I have to perform and I have to do exactly what my teacher's telling me. And I always tell my students, no, I'm not that teacher. If you're having a bad day, let me know. If you feel like your horse is off, let me know. And let me change my lesson plan to help you that day. And so you have to listen to the horse and the rider as a pair.
Mm-hmm.
Too, as a teacher, because if they've come in and are already shut down or stressed out, it's not going to be a good lesson, and they're not going to be able to learn, just like the horse, and the rider's going to make the horse feel that way, and then you just got this bad whirlwind of not learning happening.
Yeah. So so as we're talking through this, and I think some people are probably thinking this, right? Because it's like, okay, we're talking about harmony and the horse is being curious, and that's all great. But there's times, I think, right? So, you hear people kind of describe their horses as rude, or, that they're, maybe their suggestion's a lot more than suggestion, right? It's not, I'm going to take one step over here, I'm going to spin and, take off over there, right? So how does this work with that kind of a horse or that kind of situation, right? Where, maybe they're a little more, shall we say, assertive, or have more of an expressive opinion.
So there's a lot of kindness and gentleness and boundaries as well that you need to set with the horse. So no kicking, biting, rearing, bucking, all of that. And so there's a lot of importance in those boundaries and being able to set those boundaries, but you set the boundary and then that's the end of it. Mm-hmm. The horse strikes out, you hit them once with the whip, and then you always pet them afterwards. Like I punished a horse the other day that I got in training pretty recently, and I know she's had some pretty bad training on her, and she tried to bite me and I whacked her once with the whip, and then she started running backwards with her eyes ginormous, like, oh no, she's gonna come and get me again, she's gonna come and get me. And I like pulled her forward and then I petted her and I was like, it's okay, you can't bite me, but we're still friends. That's our boundary.
And did she bite you again?
No. I felt so bad for her. She looked so horrified. Her eyes were enormous.
Oh, yeah. And so, and then, so then what happens, because I'd like to explore a little bit when you say that the horse has a suggestion, right? Or that they can make a mistake, right? So, there's, there's the case where you're introducing something new, right? And of course, they're not going to know, and you're breaking it down into tiny little pieces, or, that sort of thing. But what about a situation where, say, you've done this a million times, right? Like a halt, right? And it's not quite happening. So what would you, as a teacher, like, what would you start to inspect there? Because sometimes it is a physical issue, sometimes it's an emotional issue. How would you break down that problem, say?
Well, I would say that there's three kinds of suppleness. So there's physical suppleness, so it might be a physical issue. There's mental suppleness. The horse may not be paying attention. They might be watching their friends out in the pasture. And it might be an emotional issue. There's emotional suppleness. So the horse might be emotionally stressed out because, say, they're in a new place or something like that. Yeah. So those are the things that I would look at if somebody said their horse wasn't listening to them. Mm-hmm. And also I would tell people to check in with themselves, because especially once you get a good harmony with the horse and the horse is present and with you, it's very rare that they're not obedient. It's always funny for me when I watch people ride my pony Fancy, because she does a lot of lessons and they're like, she's not listening to me. And I'm watching the rider and I'm like, she's actually doing exactly what you're asking her to do. Mm-hmm. So making sure that the rider is present to what they're doing. And that's a big difference between a beginner rider and an advanced rider, is your level of awareness. It's not necessarily more skill. It's a huge part of it. It's just being aware of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, I would assume that's pretty nuanced to teach, right? That's kind of a subtle thing. To teach, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, and especially since in the horse world, they always think of the evil in the horse, and the horse is being bad, and the horse is being disobedient. The reason horses are my favorite animals is because they're so amazingly generous and so amazingly kind, and they're good animals. They want to do the right thing if you give them the opportunity. It's very, very rare that they're actually trying to be bad, and if they are, it's either because you need to set a boundary or because they were really abused. And if they were really abused, you still need to set that boundary. But again, you need to set that boundary through gentleness and kindness. And you have to set, especially when it's a dangerous behavior, a hard boundary. But a hard boundary, it's like it happens once and then it's done. It's not a bam, bam, bam. It's just one good whack, and then okay, we're back to being friends. And it's funny, the horses always look so sorry after they do something wrong, and they'll start to learn like, oh no, like I have the freedom within this range, but I don't cross these lines.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I could say, I have maybe struck Dory 5 times in her 10 years. Right. And it's always been for, the last one was she tried to do a roundhouse. Right. She looked at me, pointed the butt, right. And that was like, one strike, and you're right. Cause it's like, oh, and then you just, I pat her, I do a little bit of training work, and then she's like, okay. Right. But it's, it's funny, because some of the reaction that I had to that though, I was lunging her. Right. And she just decided to be, she was cantering, and then she started racing around, and then she whipped the butt up. Right. And the people who are kind of watching this, were horrified that I struck her one time, right? I'm like, okay, versus screaming, punching, hitting, pushing around faster. I mean, I've seen a lot of different things, that when your horse starts racing around on the lunge line, or, throws a kick like that, I was like, that's very quick. And it was over, versus, some of the other techniques that I've seen used. So it's, that's interesting. Reaction. And I'm just, same thing, right? Because I think when you talk about doing one strike with a whip, a lot of people are like, oh, that's horrible, right? But it's literally like 10 seconds, right?
Well, it'd be even more horrible if she actually kicked you, or if she kicked somebody else if you let that behavior slide. That's
exactly.
If you let that behavior slide, then you're putting other people in danger, and you're actually putting the horse in danger in some ways, because you're building a dangerous horse. If that horse keeps getting more and more dangerous, who knows, they might get put down because they're too dangerous. So you're actually doing the horse a favor by setting that boundary.
Yeah, which I find interesting, because a lot of people have a big problem with that, right? I have no problem when it's very clear what the transgression is, because you're exactly right. Like, that was absolutely uncalled for, right? And just walked in, boom, done. And literally never happened again, but yeah, but I see people like, like harassing their horses, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, and they think that's punishment, and it's really not, and I'm using the word punish in a very clear way, right? Of setting that boundary. So yeah. So really interesting. Now, you talked about suppleness, right? You talked about mental suppleness, emotional suppleness. So what does that mean exactly when we talk about suppleness? Is it that you're paying attention? Does it mean like I'm smart? Does it mean, I'm not tuning you out and smoking a cigarette in my head? Like what would you call the, suppleness for somebody who wasn't acquainted with that?
I would say it's softness and being able to be balanced. Like usually when I think of suppleness, I think of like being flexible, but which I guess does actually apply to emotional and physical suppleness. So being flexible and being soft.
So if I were to introduce something, say that was completely brand new, my horse would be like, okay, I'll give it a whirl, kind of thing. Like, they're not going to panic, or they're not going to shut down.
Right.
They're going to still be engaged with you, but kind of at this very calm type of state, right? This curious state versus, panicking or something else, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's
okay.
a better way of saying it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, suppleness, I mean, yeah, it's kind of it's an interesting term. I mean, but it fits, right? You know, so yeah, no, that's really cool. Well, we're coming about the hour, so I always end the interview with one question, and that is, what was your aha moment in your writing career, your training career, that you would want to share with the viewers?
I would say when I finally found the rhythm. I had no sense of rhythm or timing. I was not musically gifted. Now I'm learning how to play the cello. I don't think I ever could have done it before I
Oh,
found.
wow.
Yeah. And so I remember the day it happened, I started counting in my head, like, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my gosh, I get it. It all makes sense after I started counting. And so I've actually been telling a lot of my students that lately, because I had no rhythm or sense of timing or anything like that before. And so being able to count in my head helped me so much.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a big one. That's a big one. I'll do it out loud sometimes. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I do it out loud sometimes too. And it's good sometimes to just watch your horse's shoulders and count your horse's shoulders, and that'll help teach you the rhythm.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great one. So, Megan, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. And this is Under the Forelock. We'll have show notes all about what Megan is up to and how to get in touch with her if you want to have lessons with her locally. And then hopefully, like you said, you might have some clinics coming up in the future for Mediterranean work. So stay tuned for that. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night.